Hello, I'm Melissa Duenas, Senior Vice President of Communications and Marketing at Leidos. I proudly serve on the board of the Washington West Film Festival, and I'm happy to be here today, filming from our new global headquarters, immediately adjacent to the festival's headquarters. At Leidos, we are committed to making the world healthier, safer, and more efficient through information technology, engineering, and science. Our 39,000 employees are equally committed to improving the communities where we live and work. Today, we are operating in uniquely challenging times, when an honest reckoning with America's racial injustice is sorely needed and necessary. Leidos is proud to be working alongside a number of nonprofits, including Washington West Film Festival, to help raise awareness and address the racial inequality impacting our nation. At Leidos, we firmly believe that equality and justice must be a universal experience. Each of us must be willing to take action, because racism and brutality have no place in our society. We hope you enjoy this timely interview with the director and producer of The Loving Story, Washington West's opening night film. The Loving Story offers a unique perspective on this critically important issue. On behalf of our global team at Leidos, we are so pleased to be a presenting sponsor of the Washington West Film Festival, now for 6 years running. Welcome to Washington West, and enjoy the interview.
Nancy and Elizabeth, I want to thank you for joining me today and the Washington West audience. It's absolutely wonderful to have you both with us as we celebrate our 10th festival in kind of an unusual but hopefully memorable way. Now for some historical context, it was 1 decade ago, which is wild to think about, that we were programming our very first Washington West Film Festival, and our team enthusiastically selected The Loving Story as our opening night film. We were so grateful to have you and this particular story really kickstart our journey as a festival for several reasons. For the significance of the content, this kind of quiet love story that led to a very significant landmark civil rights decision by the Supreme Court, for your thoughtful craftsmanship as filmmakers, and because this story is really emblematic of our ethos as an organization, that story can change the world. I watched the film again earlier this week after many years and felt overcome with emotion, which part of that could have been nostalgia, but I think I was really struck by the weight and relevancy of this story in today's context and the underlying issues of racial injustice and discrimination. You both carefully constructed a beautiful and important film that prompts so many questions, but for today, I'm just going to ask a handful and leave the people wanting more. So to begin, I'm wondering if you can just share your personal origin story with this film. What led you to the story? What led you to make a documentary about Richard and Mildred Loving?
I guess I can start, and then Elizabeth should chime in because she's certainly part of it. I was actually searching around for my first film. I had been running a film festival, somewhat like yours, called Full Frame. And I had decided I wanted to step down from that role and start making films. And I had come across an obituary on Mildred Loving in May of 2008. And I was absolutely overwhelmed by her story, not only for its social justice issues, the coincidence that we were dealing with Obama's run for the White House at that point. There was Proposition 8 in California that was dealing with same-sex marriage, but it was a love story. And I just felt like it would be such a powerful movie, and I was kind of shocked that no one had made it. So that's really the beginning of it. I started quickly putting together some research and talking to people about doing this. And then I met Elizabeth. And that was the following year, right?
Yeah, because I had just moved from New York to Durham, and we met at Full Frame at a screening for something else, and we had lunch shortly thereafter, and you told me all about the film, and sort of the skeptic in me said, yeah, but what are we going to make it out of? I mean, it's a historical film. Is there material? And you had handed me a DVD in that lunch, and he was like, oh, I put something together. Just look at this. And I went home and popped the DVD in, and it was that beautiful, incredible footage that was shot by Hope Ryden. And I think I called you immediately, and I was like, yes, let's do this together. And we had no idea that our beginning work would blossom into such an endeavor. I think, we were cutting the film out of the studio in my living room for a while. It was all very, pieced together, but it was quite an adventure, and I have such fond memories of those really early days.
I do too. We had a lot of fun also producing, because we went and we did interviews together. We interviewed the 2 lawyers, Phil Hirschkopf and Bernie Cohen, who just passed away. You may have noticed he passed away just last week. And they introduced us to Peggy Loving. And that was also a huge opportunity for us. So we were on this journey from the beginning together. And I agree with Elizabeth. I'm not sure we knew what it would blossom into, but we're very grateful it did.
I'll never forget being at that little hotel in Caroline County after going to an event we put on a little event at the public library. Do you remember this, Nancy? And it was a very early trailer or selective scenes that we showed, and we were trying to convince people to go into their attics and look for photographs or old film reels or anything that they might have of Richard and Mildred. And Peggy came, and even though she'd done the interview with us, I think she was skeptical about anyone wanting to tell the story of her parents. And after that little meeting at the library, she said, well, I have some photos that you might be interested in. And Nancy and I were like, well, okay. We thought they were going to we had seen some family photos that unfortunately hadn't withstood the test of time very well. Mm-hmm. She came over to our hotel with this giant, beautiful folder full of all of those incredible they weren't even contact prints, they were just prints.
They were 11 by 14 prints.
Yeah, that the photographer had sent back to the family, and everyone assumed that those photographs were lost, with the exception of the 4 or 5 that had been printed. And it was like a gift after gift after gift.
Yes. Yeah. They were taken by Gray Villette. And interestingly enough, Hope Ryden, who, as Elizabeth said, was the filmmaker who made the beautiful black and white footage that we have in the film. We kind of, stream it through the entire movie. Later, she went to work for ABC, and she had been the field producer on an interview with Richard and Mildred just before the case went to the Supreme Court. And she had shot this in color. And they were sitting on their porch and they were looking at photographs. They had these 11 by 14 proofs on Mildred's lap, and she was kind of thumbing through them as she was talking to them. And only later did we realize those were the very photographs that Peggy had given us and that we also used throughout the film to tell the story.
Yeah. That's amazing. So once you started to entice people with this story, they were really drawn in and really wanted to help and be part of it, sounds like.
I think they were all ready for the story to be told. I think they were a little bit reticent initially, and they're always worried about who's going to tell it and how. But part of the challenge in making films like that is to get people to trust you. And Elizabeth and I really worked hard to do that. And I guess the rest is history, as they say. But we're very happy with the outcome. And the film itself has stood the test of time, and that means a lot to us.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it sounds like the building trust with the different people in the film was definitely part of the process. And I'm also wondering, related to the process of actually presenting this story, because it is such a significant life-changing event and narrative. And I can imagine there's a sense of responsibility and maybe a little bit of fear that comes with realizing we're the ones who are presenting this story to the world now. And I wanted to ask a question about the style and the pacing. And there was a moment where Bernie Cohen comments about, he says, the wheels of justice turn slowly. And the last song in the film, Slow Train, says something kind of similar. It's a slow train, but it's moving on, which seemed to me like a very intentional choice on your part. So I'm wondering how this concept, this protracted view of time, sort of methodical, steady pacing, how did that inform your storytelling approach? Were you trying to invoke a certain feeling in the viewer by presenting the footage in a certain way?
Well, one of the challenges is that because though the footage is extraordinary footage, it was only shot over 4 days. And we were challenged with, and Gray Villette's pictures were really only shot over 2 or 3 days. So we were challenged with finding a way to draw this story out over the 9 years that it took place, using that material. And, I think Elizabeth and I work in similar ways. We kind of do it instinctively. I don't think we ever sat down and said, this is what we have to do. We just knew we had to do it. And music became a big part of it. I'm glad you brought that up. And it has become a big part of all the films I make. I really feel like music provides a very powerful narrative tool. And so from that song that you mentioned was a way of reflecting on the amount of time that it took. But there were other pieces in the film as well, the New World Symphony, which spoke to us because the Adagio section is often referred to as the coming home section. So Elizabeth, do you have any other thoughts about that? I mean, that's my immediate response to your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't think we ever did anything like a paper cut. I'm sure we had transcripts. I don't think we referenced them very often. It was very intuitive. And I mean, the film took a couple of different forms before it finally found its proper being. But surprisingly enough, it wasn't a full restructure ever.
That's right.
It was refinements, and it just landed. It seemed so natural to divide it into chapters and to make those chapters sort of self-sufficient, almost little micro narratives within the larger story. And the photographs and the pacing of the cutting is totally derivative of the beautiful shooting. I mean, I think Nancy and I both share a very patient aesthetic and aren't bothered by the idea that people are going to have to wait for the payoff of the shot. And I think that makes it actually feel more real, because sometimes, especially in that old footage, you really feel like you're right there with them. And we avoided doing a lot of big moves on photos or anything that distracted from the actual content itself.
That's really a good point. There are a lot of people and may have made wonderful films in this way, but many people go in when they see footage like that and they cut it a lot. They move quickly and they cut it, and we've got such short attention spans that people do want to see things move quickly. And we both felt immediately that we needed to let these things, they needed to become full scenes. They needed to play out. They needed to be paced in a way that, as Elizabeth just said, as if we were in the room with these people. And I think that really did pay off. One of the interesting things is that we began the film a little differently than what you saw. We started off a little bit more mysteriously. And we were working with HBO and Shirley Evans, who is a wonderful, wonderful consultant on things like this. She was, as the head of HBO documentary, she was our executive producer. And she felt very strongly that we had to set the stakes immediately, that we needed to let people know what was at stake. And, at first we were a little uncomfortable with that. We had kind of liked the mysterious, almost poetic approach that we had started. And we said, but it was Elizabeth who said, come on, we can do this and we can keep that sensibility. And we went back to the drawing board. It's the only restructuring we did, really, and put that little introduction into the film before we start on the road. And it was very smart of Shirley Evans, as she is always that smart about these things. And again, the challenge for us was to keep the poetry that we'd already discovered in the story, and still do what she needed us to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we didn't have unlimited resources in terms of, there are only a number of people that we interviewed. We didn't go out and try and interview everyone that had ever met Richard and Mildred. We really wanted the story to be told by the people who lived it. And we had the great fortune that both of the attorneys were still living and able to talk to us, and that Peggy was able to talk to us, and that one of Richard's friends was able to chime in. But it was important, I think, to the way that the film felt, that it was told by the people who had lived it. And oftentimes in historical documentary filmmaking, you don't get that privilege. Your subjects are long gone. So it was the perfect window, because had we waited much longer, I'm not sure we would have had the same kind of movie.
Yeah, well, that's so interesting to hear the thoughtfulness that really went into your approach. And I think the style is so effective. I felt like it really reflected the spirit of Richard and Mildred, and it did draw you right in. And I felt, I'm just imagining, being in the room with them as she puts on her son's socks, and he's going on about he has so many socks, and it really was a disarming pace that kept me captivated throughout. So congratulations on that. And I want to pivot a little bit to ask about your role as activists and filmmakers, because there's a sentiment that Mildred shares in the film that really stayed with me. She said she wasn't trying to do anything concerning civil rights beyond what she saw on TV, that she was just trying to get back home. But in just trying to get back home, she essentially changed the world in a very tangible, lasting way. And I think in telling her and Richard's story, you two are doing something similar. So I'm curious, how do you see yourselves as activists, and how do you use film as a tool in your activism?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
So she had more time to think, right? It's something that I've given a lot of thought to recently, because we're living in a moment, the Black Lives Matter moment, which has effectively has put in front of us some of the major questions about who should be making these kinds of movies. And Elizabeth and I are both white filmmakers, and we have both engaged in films of this type. I made 2 other films that dealt with similar themes, and it's given me a lot of time to consider whether or not I should have, and whether or not what I bring to these films is something different than what a Black filmmaker would bring to them. No question that a Black filmmaker will tell the story differently and perhaps better. But is there some value in a white filmmaker telling the story? And I think it goes to the heart of something else that's being discussed in this movement right now, which is allyship. I think that there is something I feel like I've been experiencing, and throughout this period, throughout these 10 or so years, a sense of allyship in this movement without having articulated it before. So I think, again, time will tell whether this was the right approach and the right decision, but I'm proud of these films, and I'm proud that we've, put ourselves out there and we've made them. And I hope that they are a beacon to others, and particularly Black filmmakers. It opens up the opportunity for many Black filmmakers to tell these stories. We want to elevate their voices, just as ours have been elevated over the years. So we recognize the reason for the discussion around representation, and I hope that we will be accepted as allies in that process.
Yeah. I don't have much to add other than the fact that in the particular case of this film, it's a story about love that crosses races. And so, the concept that any one group would own the story, it flies in the face of the film and the love story at its heart, I think, in a lot of ways, but I think that in a broader context of activism outside of this immediate moment, stories like this are really important to preserve while the people are still alive. And in addition to the film, I know Nancy's got her archive of materials that weren't included in the film that will be going someplace important someday. And I think that, we're a part of the longer view of history. And it's oftentimes documentary filmmakers that are uncovering the hidden gems that the historians don't have to look for, because they only need to write the words. They don't need to show the pictures.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Very, very eloquent responses, I think. And building off that a little bit, has your relationship to the film changed over the years? If you think back to the first time you screened it at a festival, I know Washington West was just one stop of many on your tour, but how would you kind of speak to that that evolution and the way that you relate to the film now versus when you first released it.
Elizabeth, you have to tell the story of our first screening.
Which part of the story?
Well, one of the things that we as filmmakers have learned the hard way is that you don't screen a film without showing the family first.
Right.
We were terrified because we hadn't shown it to Peggy Loving before we screened it at Full Frame. And that was one of the most frightening moments I think either one of us had ever had. But we screened it for her and she loved it. The film actually, it had an interesting journey because after a few years after we made the documentary, then I was involved in making the narrative film called Loving. I was one of the producers of that. And so I lived with the story for a longer period of time. And as I said, I've since made a film called The Rape of Rishi Taylor, and I'm just about to premiere a film called A Crime on the Bayou. That's premiering at Doc NYC in November. And so it became a trilogy in a sense, because all three films dealt with what Elizabeth just said, how these relationships kind of crossed over, how these very humble people, all three films, never set out to change history, but did. And it proves that anybody can change history. So the Loving story kind of set me off on a path. And so I will always be grateful to have found that it's the seeds of this trilogy in a sense.
Yeah, Samantha, I too just rewatched the film for the first time in a couple of years. Actually, I think I went to a screening a little while ago, and I forgot how much I loved the movie, and how much I loved Mildred, and was reminded of sort of her calm, beautiful demeanor and the kind of home that she kept. And in the intervening years, I've had a child. I've also made additional films, and yet there's something really sticky about the process and the way that film unfolded that I really cherish. So I think that, while my work, I've done some historical work, but I sort of went in another direction and have been working in film all over the world. That's this latest project based on Three Falconers, which have nothing to do with historical filmmaking. I think a lot of the lessons that Nancy and I learned together and that she taught me making this film have stuck with me as my craft as a storyteller is constantly being refined.
Well, I'm very flattered that she said I taught her anything, because it was my first film and it was not Elizabeth's, and she taught me a tremendous amount. It was a wonderful partnership, and I think I don't know about you, but I'm constantly looking for that kind of partnership in the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, you need to come back, or maybe I need to move back to New York.
New York, yes.
Well, I would actually love to quickly hear about, because you both mentioned your most recent projects, and I know you've done several things since A Loving Story, but I'd love to hear about Nancy, A Crime on the Bayou for you, and then Elizabeth, I believe Overland is your most recent.
Yeah.
So if you could just give our audience a quick look to what you're working on, that would be great.
Well, I guess in A Crime on the Bayou, you will see the similarities to The Loving Story and also The Rape of Rishi Taylor, which followed that. Crime on the Bayou is a story of a 19-year-old Black teenager in Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana in 1966, who gets arrested for touching a white boy's arm, if you can believe it.
Wow.
It's a parish that has been ruled by a white supremacist despot named Leander Perez, and decides he's going to make an example of this gentleman named Gary Duncan, who was breaking up a fight between white and Black teenagers. And he arrests him, and a young attorney who is there for Freedom Summer, would come down from Washington, D.C. to help in civil rights cases, takes this case and takes it all the way to the Supreme Court. So again, there's another relationship to The Loving Story, because we end up in the Supreme Court there for a case, in this case, a truly bogus arrest. So it's a film that allows us to look at the law and to understand how vital the courts are in these issues in general. And obviously there's a tremendous relationship to what we're dealing with today, from the Supreme Court to, the rule of law in general and white supremacy. So
Nancy, was it still the Warren Court?
yes,
Yeah, same
Yes.
justices.
it was. And as a matter of fact, when you see the film, you're going to see a short little bit of footage of Richard in this. So I don't want to take up more of Elizabeth's time because her film is absolutely beautiful.
Oh, well, thanks. I can't wait to see yours. Good luck with the premiere. It's in this digital era, so bizarre. So bizarre. We, Revere Lanou, my husband and filmmaking partner, and I just finished a film called Overland that we premiered in January at the Santa Barbara Film Festival, and we're staged to go on the road with all through the spring. But as the pandemic hit and everything closed down, initially we were not participating in anything online, and we've just started doing that. So that's been exciting to get the film in front of audiences, even if it's been virtually. And I applaud all of the festivals like yours for reacting so quickly and finding a way to keep sharing independent cinema and documentary cinema with audiences. But it's an interesting time. Our film is about three falconers. One is an American woman, and then there's an Italian man who was sort of born 800 years too late, and the Crown Prince of Dubai's head falcon racer. And it's really a film about how we reconnect to our sense of the wild and what that means. And it takes place over the course of 5 years in 7 countries. And it's this sort of majestic look at a 5,000-year-old tradition through the eyes of these 3 modern day practitioners.
These both sound amazing. I hope you'll share us or keep us up to date with the progression of the films, and we'll share with our audiences ways that they can eventually watch it and learn more. Well, I know we're just...
I just want to say we're very grateful to you as well. Thank you so much for premiering. It wasn't a premiere, it was a Virginia premiere, I believe. And we were honored to be part of your festival as your opening night film, and we're very honored to be on this call with you today.
Yeah, your festival has such a beautiful mission, and I'm so glad to see that it's continued to grow. It's really exciting.
Well, thank you both for saying that. That really means a great deal. And I want to just thank you again for spending time with us today, and continuing to teach us about the ever important fight of the Lovings. And Nancy, I know you quickly mentioned Bernard Cohen earlier in the call, and I want to mention that as well. He passed away earlier this month, and Virginia state flags were ordered to fly at half-staff to really honor Mr. Cohen, who changed American history and whose legacy lives on. So Nancy and Elizabeth, thank you for your amazing and selfless work. I can't wait to see your latest films, and you are perfect examples of how you can use story to change the world. Thanks so much, and hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you, Samantha.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.